Particularly bold and brash warriors view offense as the best form of defense. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Let's talk a bit about the countercharge special rule. I think one of my favorite special rules in Warhammer The Old World so far, and a rule that I've been taking advantage of in my own games. Now, not all heavy cav units have access to the rule, so if you're lucky enough to be your Empire Knights or your Bretonnian Knights of the Realm, then you do come with it. But your core Chaos Knights or your Silver Helms, for example, don't have countercharge, and so you've got to upgrade to the elite heavy cav to get that rule. It can only be used by units that consist entirely of models with the special rule, which means that if you've got a unit of bull boys, for example, and you've got some goblins in the unit on wolves, they don't have the countercharge rule, you're unable to do it. But you can give the rule to characters by giving them the correct mount. Of course, in Warhammer The Old World, the riders and the mounts share the special rules, and therefore you're able to give your characters the countercharge rule by putting them on the correct mount, stick them in the unit, then the whole unit can countercharge. Now, you can only countercharge cavalry, chariots, and monsters. So you can't countercharge infantry, right? But to be honest, everything that's nasty in the old world is either cavalry, chariot, or a monster. And if you've got your unit of heavy knight that's unlucky enough to be jumped on by a block of infantry, then you've probably made a mistake earlier on in the game anyway. So really, the rule is just right, being able to countercharge cavalry and monsters, because that's where the real threat comes from. So here's our unit of knights then at the bottom of the screen, and we're up against the enemy knights at the top. Now, let's say our charge comes in from the block of knights here. How does the counter charge work? Well, first of all, we've got to measure the distance between the two units, right? So their movement 8 knights. If we're within 8 inches, we can't use the counter charge rule because they're too close. We don't have time. We can either hold or flee. Assuming they're outside of 8 inches, then we can declare the counter charge rule. We pivot on the spot to face that unit, and we move forward D3 plus 1 inches directly towards that enemy unit. And then both units are considered to have charged that turn, which is great. It's heavy cavalry, get your initiative bonus for moving into a charge, and you get your lance bonus, your strength and AP, and all the rest of it. So we pivot towards that unit, we move forward D3 plus 1 inches, 2 inches or whatever, and then they roll their dice and do their charge as normal, and we both count as charging. Now, let's say we've got a multiple charge now. We've got 2 units charging into us. A unit can only counter charge in response to 1 charge per turn, right? So let's say they're both declared the charge on our unit of knights. We have to declare which unit we're going to counter charge in. Now, in Warhammer The Old World, all the charges are declared first, and then you declare your charge reaction. So we can choose, do I count, assuming they're both out of their movement value in range, right? Assuming they're both outside of 8 inches, then we can choose which unit we're going to countercharge. So let's say we choose to countercharge the unit on the left. Again, we pivot, we move towards them. And we can only countercharge once, which means we can't then also declare a countercharge against the other unit and pivot again and move again, right? We just pivot and move once, but we still count as charging that turn, right? So when these units move in and roll their charging, assuming they both make the charge and they come in, we're going to be counted as charging against both those units. We're going to get our lance bonus, we're going to get our extra strength, and of course, we get that crucial initiative bonus, which will help us to strike first, or at least at the same time as the incoming cavalry. Sometimes, however, things can get a little bit tricky because if you're being charged by multiple units, you may find that once you've moved, you're in a different position relative to those units after you've made the counter charge move, right? So let's say they both declare the charge, just like last time. We're going to turn now and counter charge that second unit, okay? So we move forward our D3 plus 1 inches, and now it looks like this other unit is now in our flank. Okay, so does that mean they get a flank charge? Well, unfortunately not, because the rules in the charge section, not in the counter charge section, in the regular charge section of the rule book, are very clear because it says in the second paragraph here, a charging unit's position when the charge is declared determines whether it charges into the front, flank, or rear of the enemy unit. A unit's position in relation to its potential charge target is determined when the charge is declared, which means even though we're now showing our flank to this unit, it still has to charge our front. And of course, we can only countercharge in response to a charge into the front anyway. And so this will when this occurs, it means that that charging unit has to make it into your front somehow. Now, at this angle, it's not too bad, right? So when those units come in, it just means that instead of aligning to your flank, they're going to align to your front. Okay, and there's a bit of impassable terrain there, and so they can't all get into base-to-base contact, or perhaps they don't have the movement on the dice to all get into base contact. But that's fine. The units made it into your front. It's a little bit of an abstraction, but if you're thinking about it in terms of the units are moving at the same time, then hopefully that shouldn't be too hard to sort of imagine in your mind as the two units hit each other. Now, sometimes you're going to have a bit of a bizarre interaction. Now, my face might be obscuring the picture a little bit, but there's also a lone character, as you can see in the top right of the picture, in addition to two knight units that we're coming up against. Now, if we look at our front arc, right, everything's in our front arc, and this won't happen that often, but if you're someone like me who likes to take a big wide bus of like 10 wide ball boys or something like that, then it does happen from time to time that you've got a wide unit, and therefore there are people charging you from quite different parts of the board. And let's say we choose to countercharge that lone character at the top right. So we're actually moving then quite far away from that unit on the left. And so when the charges go in then, what might happen? Well, that unit on the left might end up failing its charge, or it might not be able to make it into your front arc. It might end up doing a disordered charge, in which case it won't get its initiative bonus. And that can work in your favor, right? So you've got to really consider which unit should I countercharge and why? Where is my unit going to end up relative to the other models on the board? Am I going to get some advantage? And obviously, if you've got knights coming in and they've got the same initiative as you don't want them getting that +3 to initiative. You want to be striking first. And see if you can sort of make the right decision. You won't always have this choice. A lot of the time, it'll just be you're facing the front and you just want to get that +3 initiative on the dice. But sometimes you can work things to your advantage. You can also use the countercharge rule to unlock a countercharge against a unit that you wouldn't normally be able to countercharge. So infantry, for example, you can't normally countercharge, or even if it's a character, a cavalry or monster model that's within their movement value, if you're multiple charges coming in, and one of those charges is coming in from a unit that you can countercharge, that can still unlock the charge, in this case, against the infantry, right? So let's say we decide to countercharge as our charge reaction here against that lone cavalry model, then we're still making our countercharge move. And then when that infantry model comes in, then when the infantry unit comes in, we'll still count as charging against that infantry, assuming they make their charge roll, of course. So when should you countercharge and when should you not? Now, obviously, if you're a heavy cavalry unit, why not? We just always countercharge, right? If you get charged, you're able to countercharge. You want your initiative bonus. You want your strength and AP from your lance or your cav spear or whatever. Why shouldn't you? Well, countercharge I find can be very, very potent to use in games because one of the most powerful things in Warhammer is winning a combat on your opponent's turn. And often, if you've got a trick up your sleeve, you've got special rules that kick in on the charge, you've got a character in your unit. If they declare a charge on you and you're able to countercharge and win that combat, then you're increasing the chances that you can actually break your opponent on their turn and then, of course, just swivel round and charge something else, right? And that's just a very powerful move to do. But you've got to consider that you're only moving forward d3 + 1 inches. So if you roll a 1 or a 2 on the dice, you're only going forward 2 inches. And many of the special rules will kick in when you just get that 3-inch move, right? So if you've got the Furious Charge rule, or if you've got the Impact Hits rule, for example, now not many units have Impact Hits and Counter Charge, but there are a few, right? I'm seeing these chosen chariots in the Chaos Arcane Journal, and I think there's these Seeker chariots also on the Slaanesh Demons Legacy list, and of course Boar Boys in the Nomadic War. And if you can countercharge with some impact hits, or if you don't roll a 1 or 2 and you get your +3 to initiative, and you're able to strike first or strike at the same time as the incoming unit, that can often surprise them and able to you to sort of win that combat on your opponent's turn. But you've got to be careful because if you roll a 1 or 2, you might not get your full initiative or your furious charge or whatever it is. You've also got to consider But when you move forward, you're giving your opponent a shorter charge distance. Okay, so if their charge is a bit iffy and there's a chance they'll fail it, there's some terrain in the way, they've got to go through the wood, or it's just a long bomb charge, then perhaps you don't want to counter charge because that's going to make it easier for them to make their charge, particularly if you've got other units nearby that can support your cavalry unit if the enemy were to come in closer and come out of position, right? Because when you make your counter charge, you're also getting out of position. And so you've got to consider where your units are. Now, this can make a difference for many reasons. It could mean that you countercharge out of position, and then even if you win that combat, you've then got to test your restrain in a from a new position. You might also be using a lone character that you're protecting with that cavalry unit. So one uh, thing that I do in my games, and a mistake that I've made many a time, is that I'll have my Orc Shaman or my Goblin Shaman behind my Boar Boys within 3 inch of the unit so he can't be targeted by shooting attacks. And of course, when I make a counter charge, I'm no longer within 3 inch of my Shaman, and in the shooting phase, he's exposed. You can, I suppose, keep him exactly base to base with the unit. And so when you move forward 3 inch, he's still exactly 3 inch away. But the chances are, if he's just a lone skirmishing character, he's going to be 4 or 5 inches away from the unit now that you've moved forward an extra three, in which case he could be exposed in the shooting phase. So you've got to be careful about that. Lots of dynamics to the counter charge, and lots of other movement dynamics, I think, in Warhammer The Old World, which are worth going through in these videos and doing a bit of diagrammatic analysis. Hope you like it, guys. Don't forget to hit that like button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.